Every year, nearly 5 million people visit Yellowstone National Park to marvel at the active geysers and hot springs. It's one of the few places in North America where the volatile processes deep inside our planet are visible on the surface every day. This steady stream of heat is a big part of what gives Yellowstone its dynamic character. But Greater Yellowstone didn't always look like this, and it'll look very different in the future. Underneath the stunning landscape is a volcanic hotspot, a supervolcano just below Earth's crust.
The Yellowstone Hotspot is, well, just like it sounds. It's a place where it's hot. But the point here is that so many scientists have gone back and forth on trying to decipher just how it started, why it's there.
Now, scientists have discovered an explosion of the supervolcano isn't looming over us, because Yellowstone's hotspot wasn't always in Yellowstone. And recently, it was 200 miles to the west.
Craters of the Moon represents a place where we can visualize the passage of the Yellowstone hotspot.
Because the simmering underground chimera will move again. Where was this ancient hotspot? And where will it be in the future? And when?
Will this hotspot get all the way up to Baffin Bay?
Lush and green during summers. Icily majestic in the winters. Yellowstone National Park's spectacular geography is home to many iconic North American animals. Tourists can't get enough of the bison herds. The grizzlies. The wolves. Just to name a few. Visitors are also held in thrall by the extraordinary array of spewing geysers and streaming pools. Some of the hot springs here even host ancient microbes that create crusty mats, like alien rainbows. Hikers may not realize that beneath their feet is a cauldron of restless magma. And the heat that it generates is always seeking to escape. When it does, it warms groundwater from precipitation and melting glaciers to a boiling point, creating the geothermal displays common throughout the park. The geological system beneath Yellowstone is called a hotspot. Lisa Morgan is a scientist emeritus for the U.S. Geological Survey with the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, whose focus is on the geology and geophysics of volcanic terrains. She has studied the Yellowstone hotspot more than 40 years.
When you think about the tectonic plates, they're just little skins of like apple on top that are moving in one trajectory or another.
A hotspot is like the hot wax rising in a lava lamp.
This hot tube is basically burning a hole in the crust, creating a whole bunch of these volcanic fields along the track of the Yellowstone hotspot.
When the lamp is on, the heated wax rises because it expands and becomes less dense than the oil. The broad head develops. When the magma head reaches the surface, it flows across the landscape as basalt.
So in Yellowstone, we haven't had any volcanism for the last 70, 65,000 years. At some point, the rhyolitic magma chamber under the Yellowstone caldera will solidify and it will fracture.
The hotspot is thought to have settled under what is now Yellowstone National Park about 2 million years ago. Before that, a trail of volcanism stretches from present-day Yellowstone to Wyoming, across Idaho, and beyond. As scientists follow the subterranean volcanic centers west, they grow progressively older, except for a line of rhyolite magma centers, or supervolcanoes, across what is now the Snake River Plain of southern Idaho.
18 million years ago, the hotspot was down in northern Nevada. As time goes on, the Yellowstone hotspot was in south central Idaho, i.e. right around here, about 10 or 12 million years ago. And now it's located in Wyoming.
From 700 miles away to 300 miles away to Yellowstone. Dr. Scott Hughes is Professor Emeritus at Idaho State University, specializing in volcanology, petrology, geochemistry, and planetary geology.
Craters of the Moon is a volcanic system. It's on what's called the Great Rift. And it's called a rift because it involves a series of eruptive fissures. 15,000 years is about the oldest, and about the youngest has been dated at a little over 2,000 years. So it is an active system.
Craters of the Moon is an unearthly basalt field in Idaho, roughly the size of Rhode Island. The most recent ancestor of today's Yellowstone. Its ancient lava flows can be seen from space, around 200 miles from Yellowstone National Park. But that's not the reason astronauts spend time among the old cinder cones and sagebrush. Scott Hughes now does work for NASA.
NASA's history with Craters of the Moon goes way back when, of course, in the 60s, when we were getting ready to go to the moon. They used Craters of the Moon as a training ground for astronauts to know how to walk on surfaces that are not typical, and they might be on the moon. Realizing we didn't know what the moon was like, but Craters of the Moon was essentially used as a place for training astronauts to get around, work on understanding what they are seeing, trying to get acquainted with what field work is like, because astronauts are not trained geologists.
In 1969, NASA astronauts began training at Craters of the Moon, and the research continues. They learn how to collect and analyze rock samples, and how to be field geologists on lunar landscapes, and potentially Martian ones.
The terrain at Craters of the Moon is similar to terrains on the Moon and Mars in some ways. And some of those ways is that there are volcanic deposits all around, and there are volcanic deposits on the Moon and Mars.
The alien terrain of south-central Idaho is almost identical to what they're finding on the Moon, and possibly on other planets, even down to the types of rocks.
Because basalt is like the most important magma, lava in the solar system, at least, that we know of. It occurs on every planet, every terrestrial type planet anyway. When you want to understand how something works on another planet, you have to start with how similar is it to what we have on Earth and where does it fit in?
The Moon formed 4.5 billion years ago. But the Craters of the Moon lava fields are only 15,000 years old, with some as recent as 2,000 years. Because the hotspot trails the west and to the east, in today's Yellowstone, the geology of the hotspot is complex and still somewhat puzzling to scientists.
Craters of the Moon represents a place where we can visualize the passage of the Yellowstone hotspot. Even though the eruptions at Craters of the Moon have only been ongoing for the last 15,000 years, and it's still an active system even though the last one was 2,000 years ago, It's not in the time-progressive track. However, it's situated in a region where we can see all around us the effects of the Yellowstone Hotspot. And we can also understand more about the Yellowstone Hotspot by finding out or learning about where this is in the whole sequence of events and how it connects.
And making connections between eruptions and the fluid nature of the hotspot itself requires ongoing research.
One of the questions is its longevity. How long will it go on? And how do hotspots eventually die? We don't know how old the oldest hotspot is.
It might be much older than previously thought.
So this hotspot along the northeastern trajectory of the hotspot track has been going on for 56 million years.
So how does Yellowstone fit into this geological puzzle? Very large eruptions occurred in the Yellowstone region 3 different times. About 2 million years ago, 1.3 million years ago, and then 640,000 years ago. All of these Earth processes created the magnificent park that we enjoy today. As the Yellowstone River carves through the younger lava flows, it exposes them along the walls of the park's Grand Canyon. When the thin crust beneath the landscape is depleted of materials that melt easily, like rhyolite, there won't be a natural plug to prevent molten basalt from breaking through to the surface. The Yellowstone Plateau will someday be 1,000 meters lower than today, and could look like the Snake River Plain covered in basalts.
So over time, Yellowstone Plateau will become covered with basalts. It won't have the hot springs to the extent that we see here today in Yellowstone. It won't have the geysers that we see here today. It won't have the big hydrothermal explosion craters that we see here today. Could Yellowstone ever look like craters of the moon? Sure, why not? There's no reason not to think that it couldn't. It just might be a few million years into the future when that happens.
If this happens, Yellowstone's vegetation would be scorched, and the terrain will be a mirror image of craters of the moon. The area to the northeast of Yellowstone will eventually rise up as the hotspot moves, and as the North American plate moves to the southwest, and over the current hotspot. The center of volcanic activity will migrate to the northeast.
And to the northeast, we will have a new Yellowstone. Could there be another caldera-forming eruption? It's possible. And it'll be covered with basalt, just like we see the Snake River Plain today.
But there's yet another potential scenario. Times between volcanic eruptions in Yellowstone are getting longer as the eruptions cool. They create thicker crusts that are harder to break through. It's possible that the Yellowstone supervolcano and its hotspot could be winding down. But Lisa doesn't agree.
Some people like to say, well, the hotspot's gonna die here because it's going into this colder, we know it's colder, thicker crust. And it will be very difficult to melt that amount of crust to create volcanism. But it's a lot more complicated than that. But there's no reason to think it's not going to continue.
Some believe that the Yellowstone supervolcano is getting ready to erupt again. But scientists say this is unlikely. And if it does, it probably won't be within our lifetime, or that of our children or grandchildren.
We know that that system is obviously still active. We understand that there's a possibility that Yellowstone could erupt big time again. But nothing that is set in gold is going to happen in our lifetimes, let's say.
Many scientists estimate this won't occur for another 2 million years. So there's still time to enjoy Yellowstone National Park's fantastic, active, living landscape.
There's about 1,000 geysers on Earth, and Yellowstone has about 600 of them. So that's pretty impressive. Things are always moving in Yellowstone, and there's never a dull moment.